Thinking Out Loud with Dave Palmer. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
5 ways Adam and Eve were different before original sin as compared to after they sinned. And why does this matter to us today? My name is Keith Downey, host of Morning Joy, where truth matters. And we're going to be talking all about that with Dave Palmer. Good morning, Dave.
Yeah, when I chose this topic for today, I thought, does this really even matter? I mean, is this too deep in the morning for anybody to think about? And so let me first start off and explain why I think anybody should care about this and why we should learn what St. Thomas Aquinas teaches about it. And it really has to do with understanding human nature, understanding who we are. And I think especially as we go forward in time and things get more confusing and all of the AI and just the different kind of assaults on human nature and the different questions of who we are, it's good to know about human nature. And St. Thomas Aquinas has a whole section in the first part of the Summa, where he says, the treatise on man is what he's talking about. But what it really means is the treatise on human nature. And before that, you learn about the angels. Before that, you learn about God. And so you really see who the human being is in relationship and in comparison to God and to the angels. And, Socrates famously said, know thyself. And so when we talk about Adam and Eve, we're not only talking about human nature, but we're also talking about what impact God's grace can have in lifting human nature above what it is and can be, right? You never hear about God lifting birds above their natures or caterpillars. They have natures, and that's kind of what they are. And in fact, I was thinking about this. You really don't even hear about angels being lifted above their natures. They have certain natures, and that's kind of how they're created, and they're awesome. But it's really the human person that has a nature, but then with God's grace can be lifted above that nature. So when we talk about Adam and Eve before the fall, it was a special grace where the nature was lifted above ordinary nature, and they were given certain graces that allowed them to do things pretty awesome. But we also have to understand they weren't in a state of beatitude. Okay, they weren't in heaven, and we know that because they fell, they sinned. Nobody can fall in heaven. Once you're in heaven, you're irrevocably attached to God, because you can't fall away from something that awesome that you're united to. So that's the point, is that we can look at ourselves now and say, we have natures. It's pretty interesting and pretty cool. We're just amazingly made, but God actually wants to add to that. God wants to give us graces to lift us above what we ordinarily are. Okay, so the state of Adam and Eve, before sin was called the state of original justice, the state of original innocence, the state of original rectitude. You can kind of give it different names. And what that meant was that reason was subject to God. The lower parts of our body, of ourselves, were subject to the higher parts, and our body was subject to our soul. Okay, so there was harmony and there was unity. And so what Thomas does, and what I'll go through this morning, is just a few of the differences and what was lost with original sin, which is the condition that we find ourselves in now, right? So all this is just really an attempt to understand, who are we now and what can we be, with a super addition of God's grace. So the first one, Keith, is that Adam and Eve, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, were created knowing all things that they could naturally know. So imagine everything that you could learn if you had all the time to study it about the world, about biology and chemistry and physics or what have you. They knew all that. They were given. It was like an infusion that the angels are given when they're created. Now, the application of this, I think, is interesting to us, is that we have to learn things little by little, right? But the reason St. Thomas Aquinas says that Adam and Eve needed to be infused with all that knowledge was for the good of the offspring. Because when they had children, how are those children going to learn the truth? Because they weren't created knowing everything. So it was incumbent upon the parents to pass along that information to their offspring. Okay, so the application, I think, is very obvious. Is that's why we we listen to Catholic radio. That's why we learn our faith. That's why we go to school. Is that we learn not just to keep it to ourselves, but to pass it along to others. So that's first thing that I think people may not realize. I think what we learned in CCD class when we're in kindergarten was just that Adam and Eve lived forever. They weren't going to die. But there's a whole lot more than that. Okay, so that's the first of four. Had you ever heard that before, Keith?
No, this is blowing my mind and also making me a little bit angry about Adam and Eve falling, because we could essentially know everything, but because of their fall, we don't. So
yeah, we'll go easy on them. Okay. So all right. So number 2 is St. Thomas Aquinas says, did Adam and Eve have, in that state of original innocence, have mastership over the animals, over creatures, and over each other? Now, he asked these in different articles, but they did have mastership over all the animals. The animals were obedient. Okay, there was this order. Like nowadays, the animals are not really obedient to us unless you have like a really nice dog, which I think dogs are a gift to humanity, because, and cats to some degree, because they are naturally just kind of obedient to us. But most animals aren't, right? Most of them are running from us, and some of them want to attack us. There wouldn't have been any of that. We would not have had any mastership over the angels, all right? Because the angels are higher than us. So that's the lesson about, should I name my guardian angel? And generally the answer is no, because we're lower than the angels. And then how about mastership over each other? Well, Thomas is very clear that he says that there would not have been any slavery, because that's an insult to the dignity of a human person. But there could have been mastership of like parents over their children. You could have had a boss. If you get into a group of 10 people, somebody's going to naturally take leadership, and in social circumstances, everybody isn't just going to be totally equal, and we're all going to make decisions on our own. So there would have been some mastership in that regard, but nothing that would have been opposed to human dignity, right? So that's the second one. And then let's see, they're kind of related to that. He says, would everybody have been equal? Has it just been perfectly equal, and we're all equally, physically beautiful and perfect in virtue and all that? And he says no. He said there would have been some differences, because even though you have this superabundant grace, people even back then, you would have free will, so people would have responded to it differently. So you might, and he said even physically, just because of circumstances and climate and all that, you'd have different looks, so not everybody is going to be exactly the same in beauty. So, and then of course there would be male and female equal in dignity, but different. Okay, so he makes that point of that as well. So that's the third one, and I'll stop there in case you have any questions you want to jump in before we get to the final 2 here, Keith.
No questions. I'm being a sponge right now, because this is somewhat relatively new to me.
Yeah, and I know Tim's saying we got 3 minutes, so I'll get to these next ones. The next one is, and let me put this in the right way. Would there have been eating and natural, I guess you could say, relations, let's just put it that way, in the state of innocence? And he says yes, okay, which is interesting, because then we look and say, well, eating food and having natural relations are not a punishment. Okay, he says these are natural things. But interestingly, both of those will not exist in heaven. So there is a difference there. There's nothing wrong with it. It would have been in the state of original justice in both of those cases, but neither of those will exist in heaven, because our soul is both for our body and also spiritual. So he makes a distinction between the different parts of the soul. And so, all right, the final one, I find this one interesting. He asks whether when babies were born in the state of innocence, would they have had the strength of like an adult? Right now, babies are born feeble, they're weak, they're totally dependent upon their parents. And he's saying, is that a punishment of sin? And he comes to the conclusion that no, it's not. This is a natural state. And I think it also plays into the fact that babies are born dependent upon their parents to do everything for them, right? And that's a good thing. So, babies would not have been born, running marathons and, lifting 300 pounds of weight. That's basically asking, is that this state of weakness that babies are born in, is that a punishment of sin? And he concludes, no, this is natural. This is normal for babies to be born that way. So, all right, well, I think we're just about out of time, but Keith, that's a little bit of information about Adam and Eve before and after the fall, and kind of tells us a little bit about our state right now as well.
Yeah, well, it also reminds me of just how special we are as humans. Like every time you're on talking about the Summa, it reminds me that we're just not just a speck in the stars. Like we are very important. Yeah, he says in one place in the Summa, he says the human person is like the world in the fact that we embody everything. We have bodies like all the creatures below us, and we have spiritual souls that are similar to the angels. And so we're kind of like a little world walking around that embodies everything and also made in the image and likeness of God. And that's one of the key things that I've taken out of my study of the Summa, is just exactly what you just said there, Keith, is that the human person is very, very unique and also very special, and that's why we should have great respect for ourselves and for our fellow man as well. Great stuff. I do have a question. We'll probably touch it on the after show. The difference between original innocence and final redemption. I only got 30 seconds left.
In original innocence and final redemption, do you mean final redemption like the state of heaven?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very different, because even though we have free will in both cases, we're irrevocably locked into loving God, and we can't fall away from God in heaven, but they could in original innocence. And by the way, if I may say, I'm going to be on Debbie's show Take Two today at 11 o'clock Central Time. So
very good.
Yeah, you can ask your questions then.
Perfect. Yes, 11 a.m. Central. Dave, you're going to be on Debbie's show.
Take Two.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. Okay, so stay tuned for that a little bit later today. We can also catch Dave Palmer on Back to the Father, Fridays at 1 p.m. Central on GRN Online YouTube. Thank you so much, Dave, for helping us parse through the Summa Theologica so good, so well. That is the end of our first hour. Can you even believe it? Went by so fast. Now, I understand a lot of people are going to be taking their kids to school. Maybe they're going to work and they aren't able to listen to Morning Joy. Well, you can always catch us on social media for the second hour. That's right. We have another hour coming up next. You're not going to want to miss it, so stay tuned. Otherwise, God bless. Make it a joyful day. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. But, we'll see you. We'll give you more truth and joy coming up here after this break here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.